I had an errand to run. My wife asked me to pick up a mattress bag at the U-Haul store. So I went in there, standing in line, shooting the breeze, getting ready to pay. Young guy, probably early 20s. When I'd asked him if he had any plans, he said he doesn't get out much. And so I just asked him simply, like, why's that? And he gave me a one-word response: trauma. I've had some trauma in my own past, and things that God has been working through in my life. And so I tried to just kind of extend a hand of understanding in that moment. And so I just opened up and bluntly said, I was sexually abused as a kid, and I've dealt with my share of trauma. And he perked up and said, really, me too, right? And then that kind of led into a little bit of a conversation as he was ringing me out there at the U-Haul store. People were lining up behind me, and as we were finishing the transaction and I started to walk away, he had been saying that he just, because of his trauma, he tends to just hole up in his house. Thought popped into my mind of being isolated inside is rough, and I said, you should get out more. I said, take a walk. And I think the conviction started when I was getting into my truck out in the parking lot of like, really, that was what you had said, right? That maybe a missed opportunity to speak some truth. As I was sitting in church on Sunday listening to Luke's message about sharing the gospel in our community, this memory was coming back up and started weighing on my heart again. And so as Luke was preaching, it kind of hit a point where I was like, okay, God, I feel like you're asking me to go back and do better than that. At first I'd said, okay, God, I'll go back. I'll try to look up what day I'd been in there and maybe go try to run into him again, assuming he's got a consistent schedule. And, I'll do that this next week. And then, a few more minutes go by with Luke preaching, and it's continuing to weigh on me. And, I was like, God, okay, I hear you. Not this next week, after service. I'll go after service. It continues to weigh on me. And as my head starts going to like, God, are you asking me to go now? And I just start asking that question of like, God, do you really want me to get up, walk out of service, and go back to the U-Haul store right now? And just as I'm asking God that question, Luke transitions into the leaves the 99 to go after the one. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I hear you, God. I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna go now. So I'm walking out of service, texting my wife, telling her, hey, I'll be right back, hang out with the kids, drive out of the parking lot, and then the head games start. What are the chances that this person is actually there, right? And the first thing I heard in asking that question of, it doesn't matter, I asked you to go. And so I walk into the U-Haul store and I'm waiting in line, and then a pretty clean-cut guy comes walking out of the bathroom in a polo shirt and steps up to the empty register at the counter and says, who's next? And that's me, right? And so all I could say when I stepped up was, kind of gave him a little bit of a, hey, I was in here Tuesday, I was sitting in church, and God told me to come back, and so I'm here. And as I'm saying this, the girl sitting next to him at the counter really perks up and kind of looks up and locks eyes with me. And I just said, I don't know who needs to hear this, but somebody here needs to hear that God sees that you're hurting and you're broken and you're dying inside, and he wants to make you new. And I wrote my name down with my cell number on a sticky note and left it on the counter, and I said, whoever needs to hear that, here's my name and my number, and would be happy to follow up. Nothing's come of that yet. As I've reflected on that, I had the conviction when I got into my truck after I told him to take a walk, right? I could have heeded that conviction and turned around and made better on that open door and opportunity in that moment, and I didn't, right? I walked away from that. It's really easy to come up with 1,000 excuses and reschedule it down the road and let things get in the way of it. And I think that was something profound for me in this experience, was just God continuing to lead me toward, no, now is what I want you to do.